This episode of the MoveMind podcast was brought to you by CBD Mountain, the sport and fitness CBD. Head over to cbdmountain.com for a range of soft gels, skin balms, oils and vapes, and purchase online and have the premium quality CBD delivered directly to your door. cbdmountain.com. Welcome to the MoveMind podcast. My guest this episode is Jahred Dell of Articulate BJJ. He's a BJJ brown belt under Pedro Fernandez and also an instructor at his school at Tukaha and Future Jiu-Jitsu as well. He's also trained as a professional teacher and has been teaching for the last 7 years in the classroom world. So yeah, Jahred, stoked to have you on, man. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, man.
Yeah, absolute pleasure. So I thought it's an easy place to start for us both. Your introduction to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, how did that start? Did that start over there in New Zealand? And how did you come across the weird and wonderful game?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess, I started martial arts as a kid, still growing up in South Africa. I was exposed to judo and karate, full contact karate as well as a kid. But the interest in martial arts as a kid is always kind of like a passing thing, I suppose. I moved to Christchurch in like 2008 with my family as a young 16-year-old. And coincidentally, I actually met and went to school with Jahred Dell, who's now in the UFC. And
no way.
His, So his kind of success, I guess, in Muay Thai and kickboxing was something that really kind of drew me in. So I started with Muay Thai initially. Saw Jiu-Jitsu, dabbled in a little bit of it, but it wasn't until about 2014 that I really kind of got into Jiu-Jitsu like properly, I guess, like training every day. So yeah, it's kind of been a slow burn and a slow growth. So yeah.
That's amazing. So it's in 2014 and you're seeing the guys doing Jiu-Jitsu. What made you think, oh, I want to maybe give that a go? This Muay Thai is fun and all, but what do I do about getting involved with those guys?
Yeah, so in about like 2012, I was at university in Dunedin, and I was doing boxing, and I remember looking over and they had mats and jiu-jitsu, and I was like, fuck, boxing's so hard. These dudes just get to lie on the ground. Like, I was like super out of shape at that point. And then, I went from pretty much being like I guess 130 kg or like 240 pound adult out of shape and just overweight to getting back to like 90 kgs and getting my health back first. And then around 2014, I was like, well, I need to make a choice here to try and like commit to it in a way that's bigger than just like a fitness thing, and actually, start mentally rocking up to class properly. And that started to inform how I trained a lot more. I had really good coaches that weren't just putting me through line drills and making me do 500 arm bars. They were helping me not just get my body back, but also get my mind into like a growth state. So yeah, they were really, really crucial for that. Yeah.
And was that from day one, white belt level?
Yeah. I was a white belt. And like, I mean, I just was terrible, man. Like, had no idea what I was doing. Very unathletic. So yeah, just pretty much from day one, like I was getting really good kind of modeling, I suppose, from my teachers and my instructors about how you can learn better even as a teacher. So that really kind of influenced how I was training. It was like, okay, well, if they can still be a black belt for 5 or 6 years at just a black belt, and they're still learning and trying new things every day, then it's less intimidating for me to do. And then, I could slowly have the confidence to go, it's okay to lose. You spend 5 rolls back to back tonight, just getting fucked up in side control. And from there it was just like, okay, cool. Well, this is okay to do. It's okay to fail. And yeah, I think that really carried me through that white belt kind of, a lot of people quit at white belt just maybe because they feel like it's not for them or they're not getting out of it what they want. Like, I just felt like I was getting so much reward from every session. So yeah, it was really my teachers who helped me all the way just from the beginning.
Wow. Yeah. That's a fortunate place to land as a beginner, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
big time to have a progressive set of coaches there that understand
Mm.
an environment creation where it's permissible to fail.
Yeah.
It's so overlooked often that we think, oh, there's no way you could, like, failure is regarded as awful, must be avoided at all costs,
Mhm.
and that's not
Yeah.
allowed. But actually, you said there, your confidence grew because you saw black belts almost giving themselves permission to learn new stuff and fail. So then it must have been okay
Mm.
for you
Yeah.
to do that. Wow, yeah, that's amazing. The fact that you even cross paths or you like know Brad, I think that's very interesting. His fight against Drew Dober the other weekend was
Oh,
absolutely incredible.
I was sweating bullets, man. Like, it's tough to watch someone. Yeah,
Yeah,
tough to watch someone you fight. No fight. So,
yeah,
yeah, just love seeing our dudes. New Zealanders in general succeeding on the big stage. But when it's someone it's just a different level of excitement. Yeah.
yeah. No, props to him as a fighter for
Mm.
doing so well in that fight. That was absolutely exhilarating. If anyone hasn't seen it, the last UFC, that was yeah, phenomenal. So you got the white belt. You kind of hit it off from the start, really, didn't you? You got a good set of coaches, you got a good school to get into, and then at what point did you think this is me? They often people talk about, oh, it's the blue belt crossroads or it's the purple belt crossroads where you're like, okay, I'm all in now. Did you think that early in, like as a white belt, or did it take you a bit longer to be like, okay, I'm a hobbyist now, but I really want to like make this my kind of lifestyle choice?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I mean, I guess it was a little bit different for me because, like I was saying, when I first dabbled with jujitsu in like 2012, I was so out of shape and just had every unhealthy habit in the world. I was like just a teenager making a lot of like bad choices. And then when I moved back from Dunedin in 2013, and in 2014, I pretty much got back on the mats in a new gym in Christchurch, though. So at Access Jiu-Jitsu, and they were really the coaches I was mentioning before and kind of helped me to foster that. When I got back on the mats in 2014, I was probably just like, yeah, worst shape of my life mentally and physically. And I think it was like about a week or two that I'd been back to training. And I just realized, hang on, this is like the first time you felt good in like 3 years. You need to make a decision now where your life is either going to go one way or it's going to go in a way where you actually have some control and some enjoyment and some use and meaning out of it. So I think I pretty much just committed from then, really. And I mean, I was still a white belt, and yeah, I just went from never having done it in the last 3 years to being there every day, and essentially leave work, go to the gym, and I'd be there for like 4 or 5 hours after training because I knew if I went back home, I was just going to be getting back into all of the unhealthy habits I was living with. So just pretty much changed the addiction from one thing to jujitsu, really.
Yeah, it's a good change to make. I think if you're still going to be an addict, which I'd say probably most of the population on the planet do have
Hmm.
addictive streaks in them, whether for better or
Yeah.
worse. Why not make it something like jujitsu? Yeah, and immerse yourself in that. That's interesting that you noticed that you felt the best you'd felt in a very, very long time. That's quite a self-aware
Mm.
realization to have. But then again, for anyone who's struggled with, I mean, I don't know what, mental and physical difficulties you were going through, but anyone that struggled with those kind of things, it's the good days do stick out. They do
Yeah.
stick out, right? It's almost like you don't need necessarily a high degree of self-awareness to know that today is the best I felt
Yeah.
in a long, long time. That's very cool that you use that as your motive to then be like, well, maybe there's something in this. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
powerful.
Absolutely, man. I mean, I think I had to really because it gave me a sense of purpose, right? Like, suddenly now I wasn't going to go binge drinking like 3 or 4 times a week or whatever. There's a festival on. Oh, I don't really want to go to that because I know I'm going to feel like shit the next day on the mat, and then I'm going to get beat up for like 4 or 5 sessions back to back, and I'm not going to learn, and I'm just going to be spaced out, feeling sick. So it just became this motivation to like go, hey, you know, like your growth and your learning is being affected by your other unhealthy habits. So it just slowly started to, you know, shift in the opposite direction. And yeah, I just feel like, you know, especially these days, we see like such a higher rate of depression, you know, unhealth just in general in society. And I think it's because a lot of people just don't have that thing that motivates them to get through the week, you know, and then Friday rolls around, Saturday rolls around, and you're just drinking again. You're just like abusing every substance you can find again to just try and forget the fact that your life doesn't really have that greater purpose outside of the thing that's paying your bills. So yeah, for me it was kind of that big kind of mental shift. And I guess it was happening subconsciously at first. Like you're not always actively making a decision, but it was more just like, okay, when you get out of bed today, you've got a choice to either live like a piece of shit or actually go and make some positive changes. And yeah, you know, it slowly started to shift towards that. Let's make another good decision. Let's make another good decision. And that 1% then becomes 2%, 3, and then 50. So yeah, it just like a snowball kind of rolling down the hill, I suppose. Once you get things going, you build momentum, and then it's just easier and easier to do. So yeah.
Yeah, it's very interesting that the motivation, I talked about this actually on the last episode with Brandon, was talking about motivation can be away from something or towards something else. And the beauty of violence, albeit controlled violence in the setting of a jiu-jitsu gym, is that when you know you're going to go in with a hangover and get absolutely pimped around for round after round,
Yeah.
suddenly, or maybe not suddenly, gradually, but sometimes it's sudden too, you get the motivation of, I don't want to do that again. That was hell on earth. And a lot of it was my fault because I came in hungover or spaced out or whatever. You know, I didn't take it as seriously
Yeah.
as perhaps I could have with your own decision making. And suddenly that motivation then, like you've discovered, can then be enough to start making the small changes of, all right, maybe I won't just go out and get wasted tonight. Maybe I'll come home a bit earlier, or maybe I won't go out with the boys at all for this once. And then you have some sessions the next day right on the mat and you're like, that wasn't too bad. Like positive
Yeah.
reinforcement loop, like making that choice actually helped my jiu-jitsu. And then you kind of put two and
Exactly.
two together, right? And then you're like you say, it's gradual good decisions over time, but your decision making kind of meta, if you will, was based on, I don't want to like feel like shit when I get on the mat because it
Right.
sucks, right? And the beauty of violence is you can humble somebody if they come in with a hangover or whatever it is, you know, like
Yeah.
it's part of the higher belts job in a way to kind of run a clinic on the lower belts. And as new white belts, we both experienced that. And if you come in
Yeah.
hungover, yeah, it sucks. That's really cool. That's a really cool,
And you
profound
know,
kind of story.
yeah, it kind of ties into where like what's informed my teaching the most, right? Is because, you know, once we understand what a human is motivated by, you can become a better coach, teacher, training partner, whatever. And there's really only like, as far as I've found so far, and it's like my current hypothesis, is there's only two ways to motivate a human being, right? Just like you were saying before, the carrot that you dangle in front of them as a reward, or the stick which you hit them with from behind to push them away. And I think once I understood that, it just became so easy to like be a better teacher firstly, but also to see and reflect for myself inside like what motivated me or and for what reasons, you know. So that was a lot of very confronting but like really important truths for myself that I could like reflect on for my mental health, but my growth as a lifelong learner, I suppose. So yeah.
Well, that segues perfectly into, I guess, effective teaching methods, because, like we mentioned in your intro, there
Yeah.
you do have a lot of years of professional teaching experience in the classroom setting as
Mm,
well. So, if you've understood the, let's say, the carrot and the proverbial stick as an analogy of motivational patterns, is that
yeah.
something that you address somebody on a case by case basis? You try and figure out, okay, is this person motivated by the reward, or are they motivated by the stick, or is it just something you use as a framework when you address perhaps your entire class or something like that?
That's a good question. I mean, any good teacher has to be everything to everyone, right? And on some like micro level of management, you have to know what motivates the person in front of you, whether that is the individual or the collective, right? So yeah, if I know I have a person who doesn't respond well to punishment or fear-based motivation, I'm not going to use that with that particular person, because I know it's going to elicit a unconstructive response, right? But yeah, I mean, I guess that's the challenge with teaching and coaching in general. As soon as you've got more than one person in front of you, you have to make generalizations, and it becomes really hard to meet the lowest common denominator in any classroom. And yeah, I think teaching is possibly one of the most challenging kind of tasks that you can imagine, because you never ever get everything right. So it's really important to accept that, and then also let your students know you can accept that as well. It's the basis of what, I mean, I guess we were talking about it before, but intellectual humility, right? I think once your students know that you aren't trying to be the font of all knowledge and this all-knowing, like all-seeing thing, and you go, hey, well, this is what works for me, or hey team, I really struggle with that same thing when I was in your context, so let's see what worked for me then, and then we can try and work around it. So you give these frameworks that you can objectively know will provide growth for the most amount of people there. Like it's always going to be hard, as soon as you have multiple people with different needs, you have to try and find a way to meet those in the middle somewhere. Otherwise you just give of yourself endlessly, and then you burn yourself out as a teacher. So yeah.
Right. Yeah. Interesting. Which is, yeah, if you take it too much as a room full of individuals, you'll exhaust the shit out of yourself, won't you? Because lowest common denominator is a fascinating part of teaching. I'm very obsessed with this in the jiu-jitsu space. I was always interested in it growing up too in school, because I was a bit of a domestic terrorist in the classroom, if I'm honest, and was the teacher's worst nightmare for the most part. But I was very interested in, like, well, how are they going to make this appeal to the person in the room that doesn't understand or doesn't want to be there or whatever? How have you found in the jiu-jitsu setting that you can kind of target, I suppose, the lowest common denominator, in the sense of, for me, that's always been, as a coach, everyone should be able to retain one piece of information from today that's useful. How do you approach, like, lowest common denominator, minimum effective dose kind of attitude for your jiu-jitsu students?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good point. You, as an instructor and as someone who is being paid by these people to deliver, content, and to teach them something, you have to make sure that they are leaving with something, and firstly, it's knowing what that thing is. Like, knowing your learner is 100% of the job, right? Because if we walk into a room, we have no relationship with anyone there, they might not even take that one thing away, right? In general, my approach is to know those students and to know their level. That's like my job as a teacher, and the homework that I need to do. Just as if I was going into compete, you do your research and you watch your opponent or things like that. I have to do that work and then go in and be able to pitch to the levels that are in front of me. One of the concepts from teaching explicitly that I would use is something called the 3-level guide. So in the 3-level guide, you have essentially 3 layers of questioning, right? The first one is superficial. The next one is between the lines. And then the next one is behind the lines. So I might ask a basic comprehension question, like, what happened? Okay. So if I had to put that into a jiu-jitsu context, I might go, we're doing arm bars. Then I go behind the lines and I say something along the lines of, an arm bar from close guard is effective because of these things. That's like my middle line, behind the lines. And then the final one is the conceptual things. Arm bars are effective in these different contexts, and conceptually as a move, we can start to be innovative with an armbar from X, Y, Z, and so forth. So you move it from the least complex, the minimum, to the maximum, like in terms of the scope that you're creating, that your students are looking through. So I tend to try and do that as much as I can with any of the content that I deliver. Yeah.
Wow, that's very cool. And you gleaned that from your professional career as a classroom teacher?
Yeah, absolutely. So my specializations going through Teachers College was social studies and English. And interestingly, those two subjects, even though you don't think that they would relate to something like jiu-jitsu, is all of the pedagogy and the teaching strategies that you'd use to teach someone a language apply to teaching someone a martial art. So, you know, the white belt is learning words and how to spell correctly. The blue belt is learning how to make sentences. The purple belt, the brown belt are starting to like develop debates between each other in a conversation. By the time you're getting to a black belt, you're literally having two of the best speakers trying to have this intense discussion and an argument. So once I learned how to extrapolate that and to take the pedagogy, the teaching practices from one thing to the other, it just informed my own teaching, and I was able to just really skyrocket my own learning a lot.
Yeah, I'm a firm believer that jiu-jitsu is like learning a second language or a language. Yeah, it definitely has that structure. And I use the same framework that you just mentioned there about sort of relative to belt levels, how someone understands their or uses their current level of proficiency with their language.
Yeah.
That's a very cool way to look at it, because then you can start to figure out, well, maybe this person isn't at the level of, you know, making sentences yet. They're actually just on the vocabulary level, and I don't need to overcomplicate them with tons of vocabulary. Maybe it's just a couple of new words for today is useful in the jiu-jitsu equivalent. Yeah, that's very, very cool. When, out of curiosity, Jahred, when you're coaching, this is something I've kind of tried to do. When I've explained what we're drilling or working on, for example, I'll give the kind of suggestion that like white belts and newcomers just focus on the real basic version of what I just showed. Then perhaps, you know, blue belts can start to work the follow up to that or continue. And then above that, turn that into what you will, or look to see how that incorporates into your game. Is that something that you kind of give out as well when you're teaching, like kind of like suggested approaches depending on how well you speak the language?
Yeah, I mean, I guess once again, that does depend on who's in front of me and who I'm teaching. You know, if it is mainly beginners, then, you know, I will say, hey, you know, here is the differentiated task for you. And then, you know, these are terms that I like to use. Let's say you do just have a general class, right? Like I've got like 2 or 3 brand new people. I've got a couple of white belts, a blue belt maybe, and then I've got a black belt. I have to have a set of tasks that can differentiate for each of them so that they can take something away. Also, I need to then employ some kind of extension so that this black belt, granted that they are experienced in what we're doing, can actually feel like they can accelerate their own learning a little bit more and then take that task a bit further. So I have to provide something within that context. So if we use that armbar example, like maybe I am showing close guard armbars for the beginners, and then the blue belt, I might show like a transition, like, okay, he pulls out of the arm and then we get a sweep, or, you know, show the next little bit for them. And then for the black belt, I might be asking them to give some some technique that they own, like something that they know that they can show and introduce as well. Because I can't sit there and assume that this person doesn't know more than I do. Like I can get them to give something from what they know to kind of inform the class, but that also gives them a chance to grow their technique and also to have in themselves something, hey, that's actually really valuable. Those guys really appreciated that. And a lot of people don't think about that in their teaching. If you can make somebody own a concept or own the idea that they've given to you as the teacher, like back and forth, you've just facilitated a lot of growth and confidence in them that what they know is valid. So you become, and I really like this, a friend of mine who's a teacher, he sent it to me the other day, a statement that he uses in his teaching. You want to be the mirror, not the crystal ball. And like the way that I interpreted that was, if you're a teacher and you're the mirror, they can look at themselves and model and reflect behavior and see what has worked and see like how they can grow from that. We're facilitating, giving them feedback and like repeating back to them so that they can hear, hey, that's the idea you expressed. Is that correct? Oh, well, actually, I want to change this a little bit. So it gives them that opportunity to do that. Whereas if you're the crystal ball, they're kind of just looking into you and trying to decipher this thing and really can't see past the clouds and have to try and guess stuff. That's not effective, good teaching. So that's like me going in and, going, okay, 100 arm bars, over to you. Like, not very effective at all. So yeah, I think it's just the onus is on the person to try and develop some kind of way to, like I said, differentiate or extend everyone that's in front of them so they can take that one thing away.
Yeah, wow, that's a cool statement about being a mirror and not a crystal ball. Yeah, because you don't want to be the person handing out fish so everyone can eat, right? You want to be the guy that teaches the people to fish so they can go and figure out how to collect their fish and eat it themselves. And the crystal ball is very much like the fish deliverer, the food guy, right? Like, oh, you're hungry? Yeah, no worries. Whereas the mirror is very much like, well, let's let's try and discover then how we're going to eat now that we're hungry. It's you've talked about this in your podcast a lot about facilitating discovery. And I think that's so powerful about encouraging and making an environment where your students can get the general consensus from you as the guide, the instructor, the host, as it were. But actually the onus is and the permission is there for them to discover, because ultimately if we're trying to give them one thing that they're going to leave with, we could tell them the one thing. But if we can make them discover the one thing for themselves and get their own light bulb, they might stay in their game forever, right? Like, it's quite possible. I'm sure there's techniques you learned when you were a white belt that, or realizations rather, you had discoveries you had as a white belt that worked for you, and you were like, oh my god, and it's probably remnants of it are still in your game now because it was a good habit and it transformed and morphed into maybe something that you do in your game now. I certainly do myself. And if you can provide those moments, I guess, or facilitate them as much as possible for your students, you're onto a really cool kind of research-based, discovery-based dojo, which must just send learning through the roof, as opposed to a dictatorship where it's all just, like you say, 100 arm bars, go. I mean, no one's going to get any mileage out of that, really.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're bang on with that. And it's just I like the idea of all of I don't like the term in jiu-jitsu students because, student and teacher, the terms have this kind of natural affinity to make you subconsciously think about, hey, this person has something I don't. And I think it's much more fair to be saying it's your training partner or your colleague, because you're bringing things out of them that they just need to find out. So for me, I get really uncomfortable when people say, oh, like coach, professor, master, these kind of titles, because, I don't really identify as that. Like I want to work next to someone to try and learn something together. And, it's taken me a long time to realize that you can't just be the guy standing at the front of the room going, hey, I know everything. Because then, you are the crystal ball that we talked about. They don't know where that information is coming from. You're holding it inside of your head. That's not really true open source kind of learning, I suppose. And if we want to have an inquiring mind, and we want to be able to repeat that kind of circle of inquiry, then we do actually just have to go, hey, I don't know everything, and that's cool. Maybe this guy does. Maybe this guy does. And unfortunately, maybe the most you learn from someone is that they're a dick and you don't want to be like that, but that's still a lesson, right? And then we move up the chain until we get to a person who's like, holy shit, like this guy has so many questions that I have some of the answers to. And yeah, like you said, that's where you get those things in your game that you just always hold on to, because you know it's valid. It's been peer reviewed. It's been through rigorous testing, and you found that out for yourself. So you're never really going to lose that thing.
Yeah. I like you said, peer reviewed there. Ultimately, one of the key factors for debunking any conspiracy is a peer-reviewed process. And Jiu-Jitsu is a beautiful art, I suppose, is because a lot of the conspiracy in the competitive schools, at least, has been removed. Tradition is somewhat left by the wayside, and what is fundamentally pragmatic is left behind, right? And you have an opportunity to peer review every time, I suppose, you teach, because you now have a room full of peers, right? And it's probably better to look at them as peers. I like the fact that you said that instead of students, because even just the semantics, like you said, of teacher-student, it does imply a hierarchical relationship that could be based around sort of dominance by knowledge, and it's not always the case. I've started prefacing a lot of my classes with the fact, like, I don't really know loads, okay? I'm also working on these ideas myself. I heard you talk about this in your podcast, saying, this prefacing some of your stuff with your teaching, saying, this is what worked for me. I came to these conclusions this way. I encourage you to have a look for what works for you based on these principles, these ideas, and then let's kind of maybe discuss together in 10 minutes or so, if after some sparring, if it actually was the case, or if I'm just talking out my ass. Yeah, it's peer reviewed is so powerful. But you went through a professional teaching education, and you have professional teaching experience, so you understand that you have to, in order to be a good classroom teacher, you have to encourage peer reviewed processes, right? Like, you can't just be a dictator at the lectern per se. Is there any other things that you've kind of figured out in the classroom and thought, maybe I should just try and transfer that to the mat, and then you've done it and it worked? Or maybe is there anything that you came up on the mat and just don't do in the classroom, and you're like, oh, maybe I'll try this in the classroom because it worked on the mats?
Oh, that's a good question, man. I think that there's so many different ways that you can apply things that you've learned that are like valid teaching strategies in either context, right? So yeah, like we were talking about peer review, I suppose one of the biggest ones for me is I realized marking work as a professional teacher is like a big part of your job, and it fucking sucks. Like, you're just marking everything in like triplicate. You've got a moderated piece, you've got their piece, and then you've got the one that you keep on your records, and it becomes a nightmare. But what eased that whole process for me was putting in a really small technique where my students would mark their own work. And it sounds like super, super basic, but essentially you just get them to swap work, their finished essay or, whatever it is, with the student next to them or their friend or whatever it is. And then you just like that, you give them a marking schedule and they mark each other's work. And then you get this perspective, but it's also reflected back at you because you're looking at somebody else's piece of work. And I mean, I guess that's what you're doing in the gym when you roll. Especially stuff like positional sparring. I see that as pretty much marking a dude's homework for him, because it's like, well, we're doing half guard. And if we're doing positional sparring, I'm in your half guard and I'm checking all of the things that you're supposed to have done if you want this technique to work, or if you want to get out of half guard. Otherwise, you're going to get crushed. I'm going to pass your guard. I'm going to body lock past you, and I'm going to get my technical checklist going before you do. So you're kind of keeping your training partner accountable, but you're also getting to see what they need to do and what you need to do to actually get those things working. So
that's very interesting.
Yeah, positional sparring and stuff like that has been a hugely important kind of context grabber, but also, if you're not doing that kind of stuff these days, your weak positions get weaker and your strong positions kind of level off. So it's not even, that's a net loss. Why would you train like that? So yeah, I think that was a hugely important one for me. And I tried to do as much positional stuff as I can when in my own training, but I also try to make like my training partners and stuff when I run a class do that as much as possible too.
Fantastic. Okay, that's reassuring. I've also been doing the same thing. Funnily enough, actually, our block right now is half guard, and
Mm,
we're doing a lot of reduced parameter-based position sparring, where sometimes subs are removed from the sparring, and it's a question of really working
mm,
on skill development for certain ideas. So I love what you said there about marking. That's a great analogy for people that don't understand perhaps jujitsu or are new to jujitsu, or even people that do understand and want to get better. Because what you've done there is you've almost taught your class attendees, let's say, your fellow training partners, on how to almost self-direct themselves, but in a way that will be successful. If we take the
mhm,
marking example, I would imagine in order for you to articulate to your classroom students how to mark properly, they need the what does 100% correct look like, right? You need the right answer per se in order to know what you're marking against. If that kind of makes sense. I don't know
yeah,
what the terminology would
mm.
be, but you need like your control or your kind of
An exemplar. Yeah,
an exemplar, right? So if I guess then from a jiu-jitsu standpoint, if you can articulate what the exemplar, like the correct exemplary motion is, you can get them to regulate each other with feedback during drilling, at least, perhaps even
yeah,
sparring too, as to what was effective and what was not, right? That's super powerful because
yeah,
now you've almost delegated the process of correction. Well, you have delegated the process of corrective marking in red pen
yeah,
to the guys and girls in front of you. Yeah, wow, that's
yeah.
that's really cool.
Well, because in a 2 hour session as a teacher, you don't have the time and the attention to be able to fix every problem everyone is making.
Yeah,
It's not physically possible because you're not seeing every rep that they do. And don't get me wrong, like I'm definitely OCD to some extent, and I like can't like I actually feel physically ill when I see it being done incorrectly. So the compulsion for me to fix it is to just go stop, da 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 da, like put your body here. But if I do that, I've taken the ownership of that, the onus of the learning away from that person. They are no longer making the mistake and figuring it out for themselves. So it's a huge, okay, step back, let them make the mistake, show them what the error was, and then, you put the method into it afterwards to help them correct it. But stopping a person from making a mistake is the biggest thing that will hold back growth 100% for students or your loved ones or your kids or whatever. So they've just got to make the mistake themselves and learn from it.
yeah, 100%. And I guess another ode to position sparring is you can reduce the parameters enough that you can take out the terror of being subbed or the ego of losing. I state this all the time in classes, like this is not about winning and losing. Like take that outside. I'm super guilty of that myself. Like I have a very competitive mind in certain scenarios, and the
Hmm.
drive to win is at all costs. And it's like, no, this is not about that.
Yeah,
And I state that explicitly. And I say this is about developing the skill of, and in half guard at the moment, it's one of the things we're learning and teaching and exploring is not having your head controlled if you're on the bottom, for example. As
hmm,
I try and get through this round without anyone controlling your head. Just
yeah,
that, just get that. And then I watch them and they kind of, they fuck it up. And some people like don't understand. I'm like, okay, here's a couple of ideas on how to free your head when it gets stuck.
mm,
Let's try it again. And then we go and try it again. And 9 times out of 10, actually, the skill level goes up a degree when you kind
yeah,
of, like you say there, like you said there, like highlight what they did wrong and then introduce the method of success after they've made the mistakes. Go and let them make the mistakes for a couple of
hmm,
minutes. Gather them round when they're puffing a little bit and sort of a bit confused. Show them a couple of things and then say, right, go and try this. Yeah, it's super powerful. Discovery
yeah,
again, right? Allowing discovery, allowing failure, removing the stigma of failure
Mm.
and allowing your folks to kind of fail elegantly, as it were, or
Mhm.
spectacularly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very cool. It's a super mature approach. Understanding your learner is something you've talked about a bit on your podcast, Jahred, and I wonder if we could maybe go into that a little bit, because
Yeah.
I'm fascinated by this idea, whether it's been debunked or not, I don't know, and you'll know more than me. Learning styles. You got the kinesthetic learner, the visual learner, the audible learner. Some groups, some camps say that's a great way to kind of identify perhaps what methods might suit this person better. And other
Yeah.
camps have said, well, it's bullshit. We actually use all the faculties pre-mentioned there when we learn, and it's a case of using all of them when you try and teach something. What's your kind of maybe your opinion there and experience, Jahred, with learning styles? And maybe we could unpack what it means to actually understand your learner a little bit further.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you brought this up, because that debate still goes on within education circles. And it, to me, it seems like a moot point, because even if I identify that a student, yes, needs all mediums to learn, unless they know how they best learn and you know how they best learn, it doesn't matter that they use all of them. So like, the debate becomes really kind of, it starts to collapse in on itself a lot, because if like I know a student can watch a move and then demonstrate it and do it properly, why would I not then do that for that student? Like, I need to do that for that person to learn correctly. But I also know, hey, that student over there needs to do it themselves and be kinesthetic and get the reps in. So of course I'm going to allow them to do reps. So I feel like some camps of the debate that say, oh, students all use of theirs, are copping out, because now they don't effectively magnify any of those learning styles. So cool. Even if a person has more than one, they certainly favor more than one. They might not favor all of them. Like, I know for myself, I'm not a good listener. So I know that if I'm relying on that, I'm going to be doing badly. Like, I'm going to miss details and things. I know that I have to see it. I have to be able to engage with it, like verbally as well. So I'm getting my ideas out there. Because if it's just being dictated to me, I maybe got like a minute or two of attention, and it's the same with our students, particularly teenagers, which is who I work with, 13 to 18. If you think I can just stand there and talk for 50 minutes and they're going to pick stuff up and learn, I mean, that never works. That has never worked. And I have to then go, hey, okay, the concept is, and I might talk for a minute or 30 seconds even. Okay, time for you to drill. Time for you to write something. Okay, now let's take that back. Let's see what the kind of common things are. And it's about structure. And through structure, we can actually build methodology and put pedagogy in place that meets everyone's needs. So when it comes to knowing your learner, you don't have to know their name, their grandparents, their job, or if they have a dog, pets, or family or whatever. I mean, personally knowing your students is hugely important. But first and foremost, you have to be delivering content in a way that those people can leave satisfied, going, yes, that was worth my $20 a class, or whatever it is. That is primarily why we're functioning as a teacher in a martial arts context, or even in a high school or university context. Otherwise, what are you getting paid for? So knowing your learner is the bare minimum that a person needs to do to actually deliver meaningful content for students.
Yeah, 100%. I think if you can encourage somebody in your class who doesn't understand their own favored way of learning to go and discover that first, or not first, but in tandem with their, learning career, as it were, you can definitely take a little bit of the load off your shoulders, right? Because then you've got people in front of you who understand, like you just mentioned, listening's not the most optimal way in for you. So you need to, out of interest, and so you've got to see it, do you need to narrate your own kind of like version of it as you do it? Because I know I've got some folks that train, they'll do, I'll tell them till they're blue in the face, pointless. I'll get them to go and drill, and then what they'll do is they'll almost say out loud what they're doing as they're doing it, and I can see they're running like a storyboard timeline, and it just logs in straight away. They've got it. Is that kind of similar for you?
So I mean, I guess what you're talking about there is they're actually having to turn their brain on, right? Like, I think a lot of people have this conception that, oh, I'm going to come to jiu-jitsu. They physically take their body there, but then this fucking turns off. Like when they step on the mats, it's not like lifting a weight. You know, we're doing a technically demanding sport. You can't just move chess pieces around a chessboard. I mean, you can, but you're going to lose, and you made no progress, right? So yeah, whether a student has to literally verbalize it, whether they've got to write it down, whether they've got to video it, do whatever you need to do to remember this shit. Like, if you want to count through things, like step 1, step 2, step 3, do it. Like, you know, you need to just encourage students to also realize that they might not know what's best. And I think, like, for themselves anyway, like when it comes back to our learning styles, knowing what those learning styles are gives a person a framework to actually think within and to go, hey, I'm kind of pushing off to this one and this one. How can I maximize that when I go to teach or go to learn, sorry. And if you don't have that framework there, they literally don't know that it existed at all, right? Like sand on the beach is just going to lie there until you actually put it into a bucket or into the shape of a container. And I think the mind is very much a similar way. I know we talk about thinking outside the box, but you can't even do that unless you know what the barriers and the confinements of the box were to start. So it's like learning basic conventions is super important, because if we didn't have that conversation, then a student isn't taking any ownership of their own learning. They're just coming in and going, man, yeah, I sweated and like I got out of breath and maybe a little bit more in shape, but that armbar's not mine. You know, and yeah, that becomes a huge issue, because we start to see people with these huge holes in their game that they haven't addressed, huge kind of vacuous areas of no knowledge that they aren't aware of because they haven't learned self-reflective skills. And yeah, I guess that's what you allow a student to do. If you go, hey, how do you learn best? And they actually have to turn their brain on and think about it. Now you've actually got someone turned on to learn.
Yeah, totally. And I think it's the involvement, engagement that creates the retention, right? Mostly like, oh, being dictated to, yeah, or like maybe 5-10% of the room will remember what you told them. But if you can involve them to employ what you told them in situ, you know, or in a drill, or even in sparring, yeah, it's gonna go in through all the faculties. I quite like the learning styles idea as just a mental kind of model. I don't stick to it rigidly, but I do understand its efficacy. And what you said there is it just gives you a framework. And when you've got to make quick decisions on the fly when you're teaching, having a framework of knowing, okay, I know that this person isn't going to hear me if I go and tell them what was wrong. But if I can go and set up the parameters for them to discover what was wrong, they'll remember it for life. And
absolutely,
the reason you could come to that realization is because you use the framework of learning styles to your advantage. So I am a fan of it for that. I think it is handy, but I'll never like peg someone in the hole of like, oh, you know, you're a kinesthetic learner, so there's no way, like I shouldn't even open my mouth. Like that's
exactly.
I won't take it to the extreme.
Too extreme a version of it if you're doing it that way. Yeah, it's a very fluid thing, and yeah, sometimes just doesn't work for certain people. You know, I've seen people that by the definition of learning styles have none of those learning styles working for them. Like they might be completely uncoordinated. They might have some kind of learning issue, and a lot of my teaching experience has been with students with like legitimate learning needs, whether that's from dyslexia, dyscalculia, all the way through to ASD, you know, and far worse as well. So you have to be able to get this person to do something in a way that they can still build some growth. And we shift goalposts for each group of people. So yeah, it's just it's a constantly moving puzzle that is teaching and learning, very much in the same way that jiu-jitsu is constantly moving and resetting the puzzle and the calibrations. You've got to do the same with teaching to find out what works and then go, hey, that was a really shit class today. Like, I know some people didn't come away with that technique working for them. Next time, I'm going to do this different. And as any teacher should, they should be highly self-reflective and critical of each performance that they have and be willing to change it.
Yeah, 100%. I was going to ask you there then, on that note, Jahred, how do you know when you've done a blinder of a class, and how do you know when it's been a shitter?
I'm looking at the data in front of me, right? So like, let's say we go back to our closed guard armbar option as an example. Let's say I've got a class of 20 people there who 5 of them are able to perform that armbar in the roll directly afterwards. That's 15 people who, A, may not actually have attempted the armbar. So why did they not have the confidence to use the move that I just showed them? B, a whole bunch of students who maybe just couldn't do it. And why could they not do it? What did I not tell them that they needed to know to finish that? So we've got variables that we're playing with there, and we have to reflect and be aware of both of those options, and then think about how, going into our next class, I might address the A group and the B group. Like, okay, what do they just need more reps to build the confidence there? Do they need positional like sparring there to get used to the position? Or with my B group, do they need to actually just drill and get fine movements correct? So there's all of these things, and you have to be thinking about them. You don't have to put them all in place, because that's almost physically impossible in one class, but you need to be aware of them so that we can make one adjustment, and hopefully that works. And then if it didn't, we make a different adjustment and see if it works. So you just constantly review it yourself. And that's why I'm kind of, even though I do believe a gym should have a curriculum should be an organic thing that moves and changes. And it needs to, a curriculum informs what a teacher does. It is not that we should be teaching to a curriculum.
Okay, that's very interesting.
I think it creates too much of a fixed position. And don't get me wrong, there's huge merits to system-based learning, right? Like we've seen it with the top level guys, Gordon, Nicky, Eddie Cummings, the Blue Baseman, the Danaher Death Squad. These guys have a very systematic approach that all of the students use going into competition, and it gives John Danaher and their coaches an immense amount of data on those things they're doing. That's different to a curriculum. A system is not a curriculum.
Right.
A system is kind of the functions that we know how to move through as a strategy, whereas a curriculum is this overarching suggestion of the things you should cover. So, you want to think of it like two umbrellas, one under the other. You've got a curriculum, and then under that you have a system, which are the parts of your curriculum that practically work and have filtered down into that pathway you create. I mean, I guess that's up for debate, but that's kind of the way I visualize it in my head, and the way that it informs how I try to teach and how I try to show people things.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, your system gives you your heuristics and decision tree in the moment, right? Whereas your curriculum, like you say, is an overarching like suggestion of what you might be employing within those systems per se, but they're not the same thing. I have been to martial arts clubs actually, Jahred, where the curriculum was the system, and it was interesting to see how ineffective the martial art became, because application was almost devoid. Like, you weren't taught how and when to apply. You were just taught the what. You were just taught the
Exactly.
content, and it was like, okay, show me, Tai Toshi throw or whatever. I had it in the judo world, and the Japanese jiu-jitsu world when I was a child, and it was like,
Yeah.
okay, like this is, we've got to tick this throw off, and then we're going to go to the next. A bit like
Yeah.
gymnastics. It's a bit like
Yeah.
formal gymnastics. Like there's a formal code of moves that you need to learn, and then maybe at some point, if you've ticked all that, a coach will tell you how to put them together and do it as a exhibition piece for competition or whatever. But it's too late by
Mm,
then. The time to teach them how to employ
exactly.
it was day one, right?
Yeah. You don't take a curriculum into a fight. You
Right.
take a system into a fight. And it's that idea of rote learning versus like critical thinking. And yeah, if you're just going, say A, and the person goes A, say B, the person goes B, I can go through the entire alphabet doing that, but it doesn't mean that the person knows then how to spell. That's the next step. And like, I know I've seen countless examples of guys who know everything. They've studied every DVD. They know all the latest cool moves that people are doing on YouTube. But when push comes to shove in a role, they can't do any of those things because they're getting a look from their partner and they don't know what that is, and they don't know what to bring out. So you don't take a curriculum into a fight. You take your system, you take your strategy, and that is going to be informed, like we said earlier, by the things that you have ownership of, the things that work and when. And if you don't have those, well, fuck, you're not even going to have 5 minutes of jiu-jitsu to actually put into practice in a role. You're going to run out of moves. You're going to run out of words in your conversation, and then you're going to get subbed. So, yeah, it's that ultimate kind of accountability for your own thinking.
Yeah, very interesting. Curriculums are necessary to kind of, they're almost maps, aren't they? Sort of like they're not the territory, they're maps. They are designed to help you steer the boat, but it's not the
Yeah, that's
fucking
a good way of
ocean in
putting it.
front of you, right? Like the map didn't take weather into account. It didn't take
Yeah.
storms into account and shit like that. It just told you how to avoid maybe the cliff edge.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's very interesting to differentiate that between the two. So I guess now that we've unpacked a little bit, like what understanding your learners kind of means as a teacher, you're a brown belt yourself. You're not a schmuck. You've done your time on the mats and you've put in lots of hours. What is it that you've learned that's made yourself a more effective learner and getting the most out of your mat time as a jiu-jitsu practitioner yourself? What have you discovered, Jahred, that you explained to me, like you understand how you learn is perhaps not best done by listening purely. It's done by a combination of other things. How have you employed that to then get better at jiu-jitsu?
I think the thing for me was to have a goal for each session.
Right.
Like, if I knew we were working a week on arm bars, my goal would be, okay, I'm going to learn the armbar, I'm going to drill it, but I'm going to use that exact move in every roll at least once. And then from there, I would now actually have a data set I could reflect on. Like reflection and the process is useless unless we actually measure it against something like your data set that you have, right? So at first, that was a very subconscious thing, which my coaches were conditioning me towards doing. And once I realized it for myself, especially now as, I guess debatably more advanced student going into a class, I might have seen the move that's being demonstrated. I have to now shift my goal to, okay, how does that fit into my game? And am I going to be able to perform it in this next role against a very challenging opponent? And almost handicap myself to specifically use that one thing. Yes, I could go and heel hook everyone at the beginner's class, but why would I do that? Like, it's pointless. But if they are doing spider guard and I know my spider guard's not very good, that's exactly the move I'm going to go and use on every white belt that I can grab. And, if it's a class full of black belts, I'm actually still going to do the same thing. Like, even if I'm getting murdered or it's working on everyone, I have to go in with that objective and make sure that that thing objectively works, not just it works on white belts and blue belts, but not that hard purple belt. Objectively, my technique and my objective goal had to work across the board. Otherwise, I haven't achieved the consistency in my data and in my performance to actually make my technique better. And that's whether that's in, I do the same thing for competition, and I do the same thing in the training room. I go in with a very specific goal that has nothing to do with winning. It's got to do with the technique. And so I mean, there were times where I used to get really frustrated with result, and that's because I didn't do the correct kind of goal setting. I shouldn't have been thinking about, oh yeah, I want to finish first. That's a stupid goal, because there's so many other points around that are just disappointment, right?
Right.
If I don't achieve that one thing, I have 99 other things to be disappointed about, right? But if I go, I want to complete a takedown, the results there leave me with much more like of a, hey, I actually achieved that measurable and reasonable goal, rather than this really high one that might even just possibly not be realistic at all. So yeah, I just always just try to go back to like a redacted kind of objective goal I know that I can achieve. And yeah, I think if a white belt can do that, like, I mean, they will just skyrocket exponentially, because you're coming into every class directing yourself to something you want to achieve. Whereas someone might not be doing that at all, and they're just there physically, and they've turned their mind off, and they're going to forget everything the moment they walk out the door.
Yeah, wow, goal setting, it's super powerful, but on a session by session basis. That's very cool. I only started doing that myself, probably like you said, starting subconsciously the late blue belt stage. I started to realize like I could be better. I could be way better, and the way to be better is to have a laser focus on one kind of objective. I would usually set it for the sparring rounds, because sometimes I didn't know what was going to be taught, right? Like I haven't always been part of academies that have had curriculums. It's been very sometimes ad hoc. It's technique of the day, man. And it's like, I don't really know what I'm going to get, but I know sparring's going to come, and I know when sparring comes, then I would goal set for that. But if you know that you've got a curriculum being loosely followed, I find that way better for then coming in myself, because I can set goals that are relevant to the topic. So if it is going to be half guard for 4 weeks, I know where I'm like, right, I'm going to set the goal of defensive maybe this time, and a couple of subs I want to try this time. And, it's like I can really hone in on that topic and go down the wormhole. And I deliberately state it when I'm coaching too, that we are going to be working half guard for a period of time. So if there was ever a time to go down YouTube wormholes, or to like go and find your favorite coach or whatever online and like look at their material about this topic, now's the time, because you will discover so much more by coming in with your own goals, right, than just waiting for me to just give you the one thing that you should remember today, kind of
Big
thing.
time.
Yeah, that's super powerful. That's goal setting. Wow, if people could take a nugget from our conversation, it's set your goal before you go in, and then collect data sets and refer back. That's very cool.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, you make so many goals without realizing it every day. You got up, you got out of bed. That's a goal. Like, and for some people, that is a really successful day. I've got students at high school that I teach, where if they come to school, that is a success.
Wow.
For some people, getting to a class is a success, because you're sitting in the parking lot sweating your ass off, maybe even crying and throwing up out of nervousness. Like, if you can get there, if you can make the goal to just do that 1%, then that's a success, and you build your confidence and your momentum that way.
Yeah, totally. And I think knowing that from the coach's perspective, you've got more empathy with the people in front of you, because you never really know what's going on in people's heads and what it took for them to turn up, until you've either asked, or they've told you, or you've had some life experience to know that for some people, walking in the door was the biggest victory that they've had in a long time. Almost like you were saying for yourself, like that was it was a life-changing moment for you. It was to help change your life and your health for the better, to do your training, and you going to training was successful for the rest of your extracurricular life because it was helping you stay on the right track. And I think you can empathize more as a coach when you've got people in the room. I always like to say thanks for coming to people. I really do. I'm like, thank you, like, because it's great. It feels good to me from my selfish perspective when people show up. Like, my ego enjoys that, but I actually just like to say, you know, thanks, because if that was a mission for you to turn up today, at least I appreciated that you were here,
Yeah.
kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
Now, Jahred, I'm sure you've had your fair share of injuries on your path, and they seem to be unavoidable for better or worse. Your mechanical sympathy idea in your podcast, I thought, was very interesting. I was trying to explain it to a couple of people because they hadn't heard the word sympathy used in there before. Perhaps they've heard efficiency or some other synonym, but you used the word mechanical sympathy, and you specifically used an armbar example, I think, or were using an example where you were hanging on to the armbar for longer than you needed to. You popped a rib, and it was because you had lost mechanical sympathy. What are some of like the crazy injuries that you've had, and how have you kind of learned to maybe A, mitigate them as you've gotten better, and B, heal them as you've also gotten more experienced?
I think, yeah, maybe the worst one, the worst injury I've had was probably tearing my ACL a couple years ago. And fortunately, it wasn't like a full tear. It wasn't like surgery level. So in the bigger terms of injuries, I've been really fortunate. And like, you know, I'm not going to sit here and try and say that I'm the most injured person. And I've been able to work through some of the things that my other training partners have. Like, I've literally trained with guys who have managed to work around a broken back, like, you know, multiple times, or like, you know, a hip surgery and they're back on the mats within 6 weeks, or, you know, a complete knee reconstruction. You know, I'm also not going to say that training through injuries is always the best thing, because sometimes it's not. If you have severe injuries that are going to impact the quality of your life and your job, don't train. Like, it's jiu-jitsu is a bad hill to decide to die on. And if you die on top of it anyway, you're going to be crippled regardless. So like, you got to try and have some quality of life off of the mats as well. Jiu-jitsu is not going to thank you for being a beat up mess at the end of the day. But I mean, I tore my ACL. I guess it was a moderate tear. And I guess for the 6 weeks after that, not training was not an option for me. So, you know, I got professional advice in terms of rehab. I made sure that I'm seeing a professional who understands what jiu-jitsu actually is, for a start, because, you know, the general advice from the general public, if you go and see a doctor, is don't train. And that's not usually a satisfactory answer for someone who is a jiu-jitsu addict, I guess. But you have to objectively go, okay, well, how bad is my injury and what can I do? So for about 6 weeks, I knew that like extension and elevating and even some ranges of flexion were going to be really bad with my knee. So I did my best to work around it. I drilled. I didn't roll, which, you know, kind of sucks, obviously, but I would drill what I could. I would work what I could. And then I'd make sure that I was doing all of the rehabilitation advice that I was getting. And yeah, I mean, you've just got to. There's no other way around it when it comes to these injuries, unless you want to be plagued with stuff for the rest of your life that is going to make your longevity on the mat harder, and going to compromise the quality of life potentially. So, you know, some subs aren't worth it. Like, it's certainly not. And you know, you have to be able to train within the boundaries of what you feel safe and comfortable with at the end of the day. You know, some people will happily train with a broken foot, broken toes, broken hand, whatever. I mean, I'm one of those people, stupidly. I mean, I guess maybe that's why I still do jiu-jitsu. I'm just a little bit not all there. But like, I've always tried to find ways to work around those injuries. If it's been debilitating, then stay off the mat, you know. But working around them and knowing where my limit and what my boundaries are is super important to not re-injure myself, or to be a harm or a threat to other people as well. like primarily, I don't want to be responsible for a training partner injury as either. So yeah.
Yeah, no, totally. I like what you said there, drilling and not rolling. That's the method I've been using for the last year or two, and it works very well because you can, with a experienced kind of eye, you can tell what drills are going to serve you on the rehab path and what ones aren't. And you can mitigate the unpredictability of a rolling session by just removing rolling, right? And the drills can be quite predictable, providing you know that the range of motion required or whatever is suitable for your injury. And I find they can actually create lots of blood flow and very often be way more specific to what you're trying to do on a rehab pathway than doing some fucking silly exercises with a band, which are only targeting maybe a third of what you're trying to
Yeah,
do because of the complexity, I suppose, of jiu-jitsu and its
absolutely.
movement. Yeah, so that's a really cool way to do it, is drill but don't spar. And then if it is debilitating, just fix that first before you
Yeah,
come in, unless you're a complete savage like you say, and then, well, jiu-jitsu won't thank you anyway. So
exactly.
yeah, with regards to strength and conditioning, Jahred, I'm interested to hear what your opinion is on it, whether it's useful or not, whether or what your stance is on that, and like your kind of hardware, software ideas as analogies
Yeah,
for S&C as it relates to grappling. Because
yeah.
I'm very passionate about the topic. I find it very interesting, and I'd be interested to hear what your take is on S&C.
I mean, firstly, I definitely think it's necessity. Like, for creating just basic longevity on the mats, you need to be doing something other than jujitsu. Whether that needs to be powerlifting or not, I would probably strongly disagree. I think a lot of people have this misconception that, like, oh, the heavier the weight I can lift for the more amount of times means that I'm getting stronger. If your primary goal is to get better at jiu-jitsu, why are you moving weights? Like, there's almost no correlation between those two movements. I don't know if I've ever seen like a bench press really translate to good technique in jiu-jitsu. And primarily, I'm concerned with the technique getting better. There's no argument that a strong person with technique is going to be an absolute nightmare to deal with. And I do my best to try and do that for myself, because there is a level where if you have two technically competent opponents facing each other, the person with the better physicality can employ that to now try and take an advantage. So why would you not try to give yourself that advantage? Whether that means you have to be able to go and suplex everyone, like, probably not. Like, I don't think that that's necessary, but you need to have functional strength for the activity that we're doing. And it is very hard to develop for jiu-jitsu because, well, it's so dynamic. Like, there's so many different things that you have to address, like your ability to move explosively, or increasing your range of motion, or improving your cardio and recovery. There's so many different dimensions, and you've just, as most of us do, have full-time jobs or jobs that we work. You do only have so many hours in a day where you can actually do these things. So going to the gym for 2 hours and doing a heavy weightlifting regime and then trying to train on top of that is not the most efficient way to go. And I've just been really fortunate to have clued up friends and professionals as well that I've met who've been able to inform my S&C practice for jiu-jitsu. I wouldn't say I'm doing anything revolutionary, like, at all. I mean, I run, I bike, and I do body weight exercises, but I don't know when I last lifted a weight. Like,
Really, yeah.
honestly, I really couldn't tell you. And that's as someone coming from a powerlifting background. But I think I did more harm to my body than I did good with any of the weightlifting habits I was trying to employ for jiu-jitsu. The linear movements required for weightlifting and things like that may give you muscle mass, may even increase the efficiency of your muscle doing that range of motion. But when did you last really do a bicep curl just a strict bicep curl in jiu-jitsu? Or when did you last just overhead press someone, or do a squat? All of the movements just have a whole nother dimension of angles and complexity, and you know, requiring a different chain of muscle communication when you do jiu-jitsu. So like, yeah, you've just got to try and find ways to keep your body on the mat so you can keep doing jiu-jitsu and then get better at jiu-jitsu. And I guess that's been the big kind of thing for me to realize, because if I want to be on the mats every night, I can't go and weight lift for 2 hours before. Like,
Yeah.
that's just going to be a huge kind of diminishing returns for me in terms of my jiu-jitsu and the actual technique.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, it's very interesting to hear your take on it. I like to ask everybody their take on it because it's always a fun personal answer. I definitely agree with what you said about if you had two technically competent people, the stronger one could use the physicality. I've experienced that. It's fucking annoying. And I do want to be the
Mm-hmm.
person that has that ability to employ rather than the person that doesn't. I will say
Absolutely.
that. What kind of body weight stuff that do you do, like in relation to your S&C? Is it a mixture of kind of the sort of traditional, the pushes and the pull vectors, or do you like to do specifically stuff in suspension, or do you like to be, closed chain on the floor, bit of both, or is it handstands, or what kind of stuff do you like to do?
Yeah, for me, I mean, I work within some of those like push and pull kind of ideas, and trying to develop leg strength as well is kind of a primary concern because we use them so much in jiu-jitsu. Um, so things like lunges, different styles of hops and ways of doing it that way is kind of mainly what I do. That's and I'm not consistently doing S&C. I think that's the other thing I really need to like try and convey is I'll go through a stage where I'll go into a development stage where I will do S&C in combination with less training. I just haven't been able to find it possible to do both at the same time and still be making gains in either one. So I go through a different development cycle where I'm doing my S&C, maybe less training or maybe more rest or things like that. And there's some stages where I'm just consistently doing jiu-jitsu without those other things. But you can definitely feel the difference when you are in those different stages.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Okay, let's maybe unpack that a little bit more, because I think that's it's very key what you kind of said there. So can you, I guess the question being, can you progress in jiu-jitsu and S&C, strength, improving weaknesses, or I'm not quite sure what we would term that other side of the field, but can you progress at both simultaneously? That's a very interesting question, because I've
Yeah.
experienced what you're talking about too on some programs that I have followed, or some ideas where I've actually gone up in one and down in the other, or vice versa.
Mm.
And it's frustrating because you're like, well, I want to be, stronger or whatever. I don't want to get worse at jujitsu. That's kind of not the point. Or I've got really good at jujitsu and then I got injured because I didn't do the other stuff. So I have experienced that as it's a very annoying juxtaposition to go through.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be preposterous to say that no, you can't get better at both at the same time. I think that would just that doesn't stand up as a possibility. Um, I think we just have to understand that there's only so much you can do in any given period of time. And those gains, you've got to decide on where you want to put them, and you've got to decide where that growth is going to be. Um, I guess it's like what we were talking earlier. You've kind of just got to be strategic about the time that you have in your day and how you plan to use that. Because it is a finite resource, and your body can only really perform at in the red line for so long before you are injured or you've got to take a compulsory rest day or things like that.
Yeah, it's very interesting debate and topic. So I've been playing around in my own training, breaking a few rules. I've been trying to break a few rules and see what would happen if. And the rules I've been breaking is that I've been lifting very, very, very heavy for me anywhere from 5 to 7 days a week. But I've capped it. It has to be under an hour, preferably around 30 to 40 minutes of gym time. And then jiu-jitsu is normal. Jiu-jitsu is the same, anywhere from 5 to 7 days a week. And I've not tried not to change the jiu-jitsu. And I've tried to see, can I improve in both? Now, what's very interesting is I've got fucking a lot stronger, like insanely stronger. And my jiu-jitsu has also improved. Now, that could be subjective. I could be getting worse at jiu-jitsu, but I think
Sure.
I think it's getting better from what I can see in terms of, like you said, about data sets. My numbers are
Yeah.
definitely improving in the gym. That's a pretty easy data set to manage. And jiu-jitsu wise, I feel like I am improving and I'm learning based on the feedback that I'm not always getting subbed in the ones that I used to get subbed in.
Yeah.
I'm like control time, stuff like that. The metrics that I'm using to measure jiu-jitsu improvement in my mind are improving.
Yeah. So how does your body feel doing that?
Right. So this is very interesting. So for me, for my fiber type, for my body type, for the way my body works, the heavy lifting has taken toll in the sense of, like, I can feel like my spine is compressed and I can feel my joints are compressed. But
Mm.
if I do 5 minutes of stretching after jiu-jitsu when I'm hot, I can mitigate that battery feeling, or that feeling of being, battered from lifting heavy. And it actually, so far, touch wood, has gone on a good continuum where I can do both and improve at both. But I have to do that little bit of stretching, and the better I am at warming up before lifting, the better the whole cycle is with jiu-jitsu and
Mm.
everything. So as long as I get a good warm up on the lifting, and usually my warm ups for jiu-jitsu are based around light drilling, progressively getting more intense. As long
Yeah.
as I do a cool down after jiu-jitsu and use the time where my tissue is hot to kind of get some stretching in, mostly passive, a little bit of active, but mostly passive stretching, actually, to just down regulate my nervous system. I can actually do both, and I'm finding it quite an interesting experiment of it's very short duration lifting. It's important to
Yeah.
state that it's a variation on the Bulgarian approach, where you're taking one lift to a repetition maximum for one set and you're out. Obviously,
Mm.
the stronger you get, the longer it takes you to reach your set. But even when you're strong, I'm not very strong by definition, but there's a lot of people a lot stronger than me. It still only takes maybe 20 to 30 minutes to reach your
Yeah.
maximum target. There's very little accessory work done as well, which is also another rule which is kind of up for debate in S&C. Should you do accessories, or especially powerlifting? Should you have an accessory movement to complement your lift? Right? You understand from
Mm.
your powerlifting background. I've not done really any accessories either, which is
Mm.
interesting. The programming I'm following, I consider to be quite intelligent. It does come
Yeah.
from a much superior brain than mine, from a coach that I consider to be far smarter than me. And I think programming actually is, although it's one thing we haven't really talked about, I think programming is actually the cornerstone as to whether you can improve jiu-jitsu and
100%.
S&C simultaneously, right? Because there are some workout formulas out there which are just fucking wild. I mean,
Yeah.
chuck it under a bus. CrossFit is one of them. And if you try and be a competitive CrossFitter and improve your CrossFitting performance, I can guarantee
Yeah.
your jiu-jitsu
No
is going to
ways.
go down, right? It's just not possible. Why? Because the programming's not conducive to jiu-jitsu. But I'm very interested in this idea that maybe a modified Bulgarian approach might have application to being applicable and conducive for jiu-jitsu performance. I'm not sure. I mean, it's in the
Yeah.
beta phase at the moment, and I'm testing it
Yeah.
on myself, but it's a very interesting experiment, and I'm sure at some point I'll try and round it all up and see if I can conclude one way or the other.
Yeah. That's not that. Yeah. That's interesting.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Another one you've probably heard of is the West Side method for grapplers. So Dante Leon is a very sort of famous, I suppose, proponent of the West Side method. Matt Brown in UFC as well also worked with Louis
Mhm.
Simmons quite a lot. And the West Side is less, 4 days a week, dynamic
Yeah.
method, max effort method, but it does have some max effort work in there. Now, they do a lot more work, I would say, per session than I do. and I think it might suit the enhanced lifter a little bit more, or the enhanced grappler more than the natural one like I am. But again, interesting, like, and that's another one I'd like to try on myself later on down the line and see, has that got some mileage. So yeah, I'm testing it. It's very interesting. I don't know if it's pro or con yet, but I'm going to try it a little bit longer and see what happens.
I could be mistaken, but I'm pretty sure that a lot of Louis Simmons' programming as well is influenced by, if not Bulgarian, at least Russian or Eastern European kind of sports science as well.
You're right.
So,
yeah.
I mean, to be honest, I think, yeah, each person is going to be able to find something that does work for them at some point. And yeah, it is mainly trial and error.
Yeah, totally.
I guess it just, yeah, the main thing is not making an error that is going to cost you time out of either.
Yeah, exactly. That's the key. That's the key meta. What you just
Yeah.
said there, right? That should direct your decision making above all. Is that you shouldn't have time detracted. Well, I guess predominantly from your jiu-jitsu, but no, totally, you're totally right. Yeah, that's super important. It was really interesting because the reason I'm interested in this, like, my day job is a strength coach, so I'm just fucking obsessed anyway. But like Eddie Cummings, for example, Eddie Cummings was quite profound in his sort of body weight training as his S&C. Worked a lot, I think, with Eric. I want to say his name's Eric Owings, but a chap named Eric in New York anyway, who's just around the corner from the Blue Basement. And I saw him working a lot with Eddie on lots of sort of what you might consider to be kind of gymnastic strength training or variations on calisthenics, for example. And his sort of explanation was because the recovery time was faster for Eddie. He liked it because he could then train on the mat and it wouldn't detract, but it would work as an injury prevention kind of tool, and so on and so forth. And I always remember that. I was like, oh, for Eddie Cummings' body type, Eddie Cummings' genealogy, gymnastic strength training works really well. So I sort of played around with a little bit of that and made some errors and stuff. So yeah, it's cool, isn't it? I think I encourage lots of people who do jiu-jitsu. If jiu-jitsu does one thing really well, it introduces you back to your body, or maybe will introduce you to your body for the first time if you've never had it. And what comes with that, hopefully, is a sort of an interest and a curiosity of like, okay, well, I like doing this jiu-jitsu. How can I then maybe continue my longevity on the mats by doing other stuff extracurricularly, and what should that stuff look like for me? And I think the key is actually, like, Danaher's been famed for saying, the S&C program doesn't matter. It's just the fact that you do something consistently.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because he's seen every program under the sun, I expect.
Yeah, I'd imagine so. And I guess the big thing that I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but like, any kind of physical activity is allowing you to find out more about your physicality. And what I mean by that is how you move your body through this world. And in a way that is a hugely empowering thing. Even if your simple goal isn't to be a powerlifter or whatever, and maybe it is just to be a hobbyist in jiu-jitsu or dancing or whatever, you're doing something with your body that allows you to move through this world in a way that is more not just efficient but like meaningful, I suppose.
Yeah.
So at its very core, like I'm definitely a firm believer in the idea that for depression and anxiety and things like that, people need to move some way. And I guess what we're talking, like, we're already talking at a point where the foregone conclusion is that movement is good for you. But I think that that's so important for us to talk about and to make explicit, is doesn't matter if it's jiu-jitsu, doesn't matter if it's running or cycling or anything. If you're moving, it's good. It's good for you. It makes you feel good. And I don't know if that's said enough.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head there. It's true. If that was the overarching term, it's motion. For the human body, we're built to move, right? It's we're not designed in this fantastic way to just be super sedentary. We need rest, but most of the time we need to move. And you're right, it's not talked about enough for the positive mental health benefits. I think, if anything, COVID did show people how much motion is important. If there was one thing it proved, right? It's funny how home training became popular as soon as the fucking gym shut. right? It was the most unfashionable, at least here, it was the most unfashionable thing in London too, until the gym shut. And now suddenly the garage gym just got a fucking a boost, you know, in popularity. And it's because people are starting to realize, yeah, you lock people in their apartments by force, motion becomes actually one of the priorities and highlights of the day, right? Both cerebrally and physically.
I mean, it's tied to human purpose, right? Like humans never just sat in a cave on their ass all day. There was always something to do, and to do something, you have to negotiate with your body to move through space.
Yeah.
And like, if you're denying your body that, of course you're going to feel fucked up. Of course your head's going to be in a weird place, and of course your body is going to actually do physical, not just emotional things, to tell you that and to try and go, hey, like, we need to do something. Where's our purpose? What is the meaning of us being here right now, physically in the space or existentially, I guess. So yeah, I don't know. I guess, yeah, you got to know your body. I mean, when Socrates said, know thyself, I think he was talking about more than just the thoughts in here, but also your whole physicality and spirituality as well. And to ask what that looks like. But yeah.
Yeah, totally. And what does it look like for you on an individual basis? Like, it's one of the beauties of going down this journey is it's your journey. Go find out, you know, try stuff out, see what works, what doesn't, you know. Maybe heavy strength training is for you, maybe yoga is for you. I've seen both work for different kinds of people. And yeah, you got to go find out for yourself 100%. I've been loving your podcast episodes, Jahred. If we've had a great conversation here, this has been fantastic. If people would like to listen to your podcast, first of all, where can they find that? And then where are you located in terms of if people are in New Zealand, they want to come and train with you, where are you at? And then how can they find out more with your Instagram and stuff like that?
Yeah. So my podcast is on, I believe, like every platform that you can find it, you know, whether that's Apple Podcasts and Spotify and things like that. Yeah. So it's just the Articulate BJJ podcast. You know, I used to have the blog, but I'm just in the process now of moving everything across to podcast format. You know, kind of written media is just not that accessible and bite-sized for people at the moment. So, yeah, I'll be posting a lot more on that, you know, as time allows, really. I'm based in Auckland in New Zealand. So I train at Tukaha BJJ and Future Jiujitsu, which are both within Auckland City. So if anybody wants to contact me, they can do so at those places and come and train. Very open about that kind of stuff. And yeah, on Instagram, it's Articulate, just at Articulate BJJ. I post usually all of my stuff on there. I'm pretty responsive in messages if people want to hit me up about anything. So yeah.
Fantastic, mate. This has been a brilliant chat. Yeah, I encourage people go and check out the podcast. You've got the perfect length of time, in my opinion. You dive into topics that are really interesting, and they're not so long that it turns into a lecture, but they're long enough for you to kind of spark the interest, spark the kind of internal dialogue that we have as listeners, and start asking yourself questions around the topic you're discussing or sort of shedding light on. So yeah, I encourage everyone to get a listen on that, and also give you a follow on Insta because you post some really cool bits and pieces. Your style and the way you look at stuff is very interesting. So yeah, I encourage everyone to get on that, and a big thank you, mate. Thank you for coming on the show and yeah, dropping some gems.
Cool. Thanks so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
This episode of the MoveMind podcast was brought to you by CBD Mountain, for sport and fitness CBD. Head over to cbdmountain.com for a range of soft gels, skin balms, oils and vapes, and purchase online and have the premium quality CBD delivered directly to your door. cbdmountain.com.